Kia ora and welcome to Menopause and Arthritis, the podcast where we break down the dual challenge of managing menopause and arthritis. Ko Joe Miller toko ingoa. Hi, I'm Joe Miller from Arthritis New Zealand, Matapona Pona Aotearoa, and I'm here to guide you through expert insights, real stories, and practical advice to help you manage your health with confidence. A little bit about me. I'm currently training to become a psychologist, and I provide mental health support as part of our Arthritis Assist services. With an interest in women's health and aging, and having gone through menopause myself, I'm passionate about increasing awareness and helping women manage this stage of life, especially with arthritis. Each episode will chat with subject matter experts, health professionals, and advocates to uncover what's really going on with your joints, hormones, and overall well-being. Whether you're navigating symptoms yourself or supporting a loved one, this is the place to get the knowledge and support you need. So let's get started, because understanding your body is the first step to feeling your best.
Today, our podcast guest is Christine Everest. Christine is a registered dietitian based in Auckland, and she has experience working in hospitals and in private practice. And her focus is on helping people really to understand their bodies. Kia ora, Christine. Now, before we start, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and really why you're interested in the role of nutrition for menopause and arthritis?
Kia ora, Joe. Sure thing. So a bit about me on a personal level. I'm a mum of three with a 3-year-old and two others in primary school. I was born in Malaysia, grew up surrounded by food, where my dad's a chef. Both my parents are restaurateurs. But funnily enough, Dad never taught me how to cook, learned that on my own. And thankfully still kept his kitchen intact. And on a career level, I graduated from University of Otago with degrees in physical education and nutrition, and then completed my postgraduate studies in dietetics. I've worked in public health, primary care, hospitals, and private practice. And for well over a decade, I spent a significant part of my career working with individuals with chronic long-term conditions and supporting other dietitians in this field. And speaking of chronic long-term conditions, I also have my own. So I know what it's like when it feels like your body's letting you down, or when the mind knows what it wants to do, but the body won't quite follow or cooperate. And this is a key driver for me in my practice, because I like to help people understand their bodies better, understand when nutrition can meet them with where they're at. And many of my clients hear me say this all the time. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. And that brings me to my private practice, where I specialize in women's health, particularly endometriosis, PCOS, cardiovascular health, and gut disorders. So my interest in menopause actually started many years ago, where I had a conversation with an endocrinologist who said, you know what, you should really look into nutrition and menopause. And at that time, there wasn't much conversation about menopause, and it wasn't a hot topic like it is now. And working in women's health and cardiovascular health, this just naturally complemented my passion in this area.
Oh, fantastic. And you also work with clients who have arthritis as well? Is that something you come across at all?
Yeah, it's not my primary clientele, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Oh, wow, Christine, I think that lived experience counts for so much, and I'm sure is incredibly impactful for your clients. And so now, just to kick off, I'd love to know in what ways nutrition can really play a role in supporting women who are navigating both menopause and arthritis. And I guess by menopause, I mean that probably that perimenopause, which is really that transition to when your periods stop.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess the best way to see nutrition is kind of like a spider web connection or approach. We have all these different points and they're all interconnected together. excuse the pun, but nutrition has its fingers in many pies, and but it can't take specific credit for those pies as much as us dietitians would like to. So if we tease it out a bit, like with previous guests from Nikki and Sam, they've touched on inflammation and bone density, weight and mobility, and also changes in mood and energy levels. So there's a lot going on where these areas of nutrition play a really valuable supporting role. So what we eat can influence how we feel, how we tell our bones and our muscles, hey, don't go anywhere, it might be aging, but I still need you. And also to dampen that fire that's going on in our body when protective estrogen is exiting the scene or when arthritis is flaring up. So nutrition plays a crucial supporting role, but unfortunately is often overlooked.
Yeah, that's so true. And we get a lot of questions actually at Arthritis New Zealand around, what they can do, nutritionally to support them through this period as well. So it's great having you on the podcast. And so I guess in particular, are there any specific dietary changes or foods or nutrients that are really helpful during this period and to help alleviate some of the symptoms that quite often are common to both menopause and arthritis?
And that's a great question, because one thing I've noticed when it comes to nutrition and menopause is that the value of nutrition has commonly been measured against improvement in menopausal symptoms. So as in, is doing this diet or eating this food going to reduce the incidence of hot flushes, for example? But nutrition doesn't quite work this way. And so if we take a few steps back and to look at the menopausal transition itself, it's kind of like going through a second puberty, but in reverse with our hormones. And so if we think of acne, for example, during puberty, we can't say stop eating chocolate and the acne will go away. And so it doesn't quite work that way. And there's a lot going on during puberty with the mind and the body. And it's all to set up for the next chapter in life. And with the menopause transition, it's similar. So it's a great opportunity for us to check in and recalibrate where we need to. It's a proactive long-term strategy rather than a reactive symptom-focused one. Because after all, women will still spend 30 to 40% of their lives after menopause. So laying those foundations for the next chapter is crucial. And apologies, there's a bit of a background, but on that note, so going back to specific foods or nutrients, the first thing I'm going to say is fiber. So this might catch people a little bit off guard, but if I say gut health, this might be a little bit more relatable because there's so much talk about gut health. And so, and the question is that, like, how many people actually understand it is a different story. And this is what I'll delve into. Because do you know that we have over 1,000 species of bacteria in our gut? And just the weight of the gut bugs alone is about 1 to 3 blocks of butter. And
wow, Christine.
And us dietitians, we love comparing anything to do with food, but that's how much it is and how much it weighs. And so, but the gut microbiome, these gut bugs, is a delicate ecosystem, and there's still a lot yet to be well understood. But what we do know, however, is that these something called short chain fatty acids. And this is where fiber comes in. So when we think of fiber, we think of roughage. And trust me, in my consults, I spend a lot of time talking to my clients about everything to do with poos. There's no taboo when it comes to poos. That's what I say. But when it's all about poos. But when they eat these, the gut bugs, when they eat these fermentable fibers, and you've probably heard of probiotics, but these are nature's prebiotics. they produce these compounds called short-chain fatty acids. And these fatty acids can have a whole cascade effect of effects on our body, from our mood to our immune system to our metabolic health. And they can influence how we feel, how we manage stress, and it can affect how well the body responds to sugars with insulin sensitivity. That's one thing with estrogen. It can affect our cholesterol levels and helping our bodies flush out what we don't need. It can affect our blood pressure by helping the vessels to relax, and it can influence our satiety, which is how full we feel. So now, this is not just about having bulk in the gut as such to keep you full, but it stimulates something that you might have heard of with all these weight loss medications going in the media lately, with this hormone called GLP-1. And so these short chain fatty acids can help stimulate that satiety and also activate this nerve that's between the gut and the brain called the vagus nerve. And that's to tell the brain it's full. So when we look at these changes that occur with the menopause transition, we could certainly do with all the help we can get to support our cardiovascular health. So that's mentally, physically, our heart health, everything. And then, but wait, there's more. So if you can bear with me. There's more to come with this fibre thing. When it comes to arthritis, these short chain fatty acids can have a big impact on dampening inflammation. So one of the ways it is through a direct influence on immune cells. So it can promote these this type of white blood cells called T regulatory cells, or TREGs. And these TREGs are like peacekeepers of the immune system, which help dampen a wide range of inflammatory responses throughout the body. And alongside promoting these peacekeepers, these short-chain fatty acids from the fibre, it also suppresses these pro-inflammatory cells, and so they're peacekeepers, but also gatekeepers. But when we going back to, like, food sources, are there specific things we can eat? That side of things, when we think of fibre, people generally think of fruits and vegetables. And they are important, but so are whole grains, nuts, seeds, beans, peas and pulses. And each category as such has something different to offer. So, and these aren't just vegetarian sources of protein. So if we look at like half a cup of cooked broccoli or carrot versus, half a cup of your beans, like your kidney beans, chickpeas, lentils, they're going to give you double, if not triple, the amount of fibre in that same volume. This is just half cup. So there's a lot of bang for your buck when we look at the variety of plant-based foods to support menopause and arthritis. And if we eat better and feel better, then that can in turn support our mood and our energy levels and our sleep. And as a mum of three, sleep, where's that? So that plays a huge role.
Oh, Christine, I love that. That's that connect between the gut health, both for menopause and arthritis. I hear it talked about in both those areas separately, but that connection together, and fibre being the key, just makes so much sense. And it's not difficult to do, to add some more fibre to your diet, is it?
Absolutely. And and when we talk about kind of like little food tips here and there, and it's just a jazz of this, a sprinkling of that, absolutely. It doesn't have to be a full-on plant-based meal. Absolutely, we can just add bits and pieces, and where can we jazz it up? Easy.
That's awesome. So fibre is the key. And now I'm just going to move on from fibre. I want to move on to protein, because I know there's lots of, chat, particularly social media chat at the moment about protein and having more protein in your diet, particularly for women going through menopause or that transition. And I know Nikki Bazant, who's been on the podcast as well. She's been talking about it. So I'd love to hear, what you've got to say about that. And really, is it valid or necessary?
My goodness me.
I know. Have I opened a can of worms?
A little bit of a wee rant, but I promise you it's helpful. Hopefully it is.
That's right.
But just I guess part of my little rant is that, with society, when it comes to food, we like to go through trends, just like fashion.
Oh, yeah.
And so we've been through what I call like a fat phobic era, where we see heaps of food going, 99% fat free. And then we realize that there can be a lot of sugar that get added to foods, and so we become carb phobic. And so we get this fat phobia, carb phobic, and now we've become what I call protein manic. And so, as with all our macronutrients, which is our fats, carbs, protein, these are certainly all important. But what is more important is actually context. And this goes back to nutrition and that spider web connection that I mentioned earlier. That what we just talked about, menopause, arthritis, actually all interlinks.
Yeah, and so, I love that.
Yeah. And so with the menopause transition and beyond, and that decline in estrogen, we do need to be more mindful and look after our muscles and our bones. And so studies have shown that we can lose up to 10% of our muscle mass between early to late menopause. So protein helps to build and repair muscle tissue, boost metabolism, and we need it to preserve our mobility and our function, also all the more important with arthritis as well. And so protein is important, and as women we do need to make sure that we are getting enough. And my clients do hear me talk a lot about protein in our consults. But the thing that I'll say is don't make it your pet nutrient, where it can lose context of whole foods. And Mother Nature is incredibly clever at packaging foods that carry so much value in one.
Okay.
And so if we go back to plant-based foods first, our whole grains, nuts, seeds, beans, pulses, peas. I always forget the other one. It's like, oh no, there's one. Because it's not only the source of fiber that we've been talking about, but also protein and other nutrients. So that's your calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, iron, zinc, vitamin K, all of which are important for muscle health and bone health. And so this is that whole kind of interconnection side of things. And then when we look at meat, seafood, poultry, egg, dairy products, we not only have our protein source, but also our iron, calcium, B vitamins, creatine, and supporting micronutrients. And so on that note, is there a role? So like in terms of protein powders, there's certainly a role for protein powders, and I do recommend them to some of my clients for various reasons. But context again is so important. So whole food first, whole foods. Don't spend more money to purchase rice crackers that have been protein fortified when you can just have plain rice crackers with cottage cheese or nut butter and get a lot more out of it, for your health. So that's kind of, again, that context message where it's important.
Yeah. I love that. So watch out for some of that marketing messaging, which is so often going, more protein in this, whereas actually it's more about the food type and what you're eating, and rather than the marketing spin.
Absolutely, 100%.
No, that makes perfect sense. And with all of that, Christine, it feels like maybe there is a specific diet that we should be looking at, maybe, or is it just about maybe just making sure we've got the fiber and the protein, or is there something specific? It sort of points a little bit to that Mediterranean diet. Is that what we should be looking at in particular for menopause and arthritis?
Yeah, and we do hear a lot about anti-inflammatory diet or Mediterranean diet, and I'd like to kind of probably kind of getting the gist of how I kind of roll at the moment, where I like to peel a lot of layers back. And so if I do that, first is that it's just like food marketing, which we were just talking about. So labels can give the impression that it can make things or processes easier to follow. But it can also cause a lot of confusion and lead to unnecessary restrictions or an unhealthy relationship with food. And so when we talk about diet, this is that going back to the context side of things, is that it's important to look at the baseline. So now you've heard me talk a lot about plant-based foods and, so far, and all the benefits that come with it. But again, peeling those layers back, as a population, are we eating enough fruits and vegetables to begin with, let alone, putting another label side of things? So if we look at the, the old like 5+ a day recommendation, which is the 3 veg and 2 fruits, is that the New Zealand Health Survey found that less than 40% of women were meeting the combined target. This is that old 5+ a day.
Oh, wow.
And then
that's really low, yeah.
It is, yeah. And so, and then Ministry of Health and the guidelines changed in 2020 and they upped it even more. And so the recommendation is at least 5 servings of vegetables and then at least 2 servings of fruit a day. And so remember, just with that 5+ a day, it was less than 40%. And so then they did a New Zealand Health Survey in 2021-2022. Now this is even more shocking. They showed that only 10% of women were meeting the recommended vegetable intake, and half were meeting the recommended fruit intake. That's the 2+ a day. And so this is my fibre yarn again, is that
good. It's good.
When we come back to that topic of fibre, are we actually getting enough? So talking about the stats with, the fruits and veggies, and we haven't talked about the nut side of things. The recommended daily intake for fibre for New Zealand women is 25 grams per day. But in that 2008-2009 adult nutrition survey, which we could do with a lot more of the funding for surveys, is that we found the average daily fibre intake for women is only about 18 grams per day. And so then if we look at chronic disease prevention, the recommendation is actually 28 grams or more per day for women. So 18, which is the average daily intake, versus the recommendation 28. And then we bring back, that only 10% of women are meeting that 5+ veggies. So we have a long way to go in terms of our health as individuals and as a nation. And so in terms of, is there a specific menopause, diet? The short answer is no, because there is no one size fits all. So we may hear a lot about the anti-inflammatory diet or the Mediterranean diet, but just like the term gut health, what does it actually mean and how does it apply to that particular individual with where they're at and what they need? And it's and it's also important to know that with the Mediterranean diet, is that it's not about following Mediterranean recipes, but the Mediterranean diet is actually a lifestyle and a way of life. And the core of an anti-inflammatory diet is not about eating more kale or hemp seeds, but actually embracing the diversity of foods from Mother Nature, and eating the recommended volumes and finding ways to cook it to suit our palates. So like, for example, with your grains, nuts, seeds, beans, peas, pulses, how it would feature in Asian or Indian or Mediterranean cuisine, for example, would be very different. I've had really long yarns with my sister who's more with the Asian diet. How do we use our beans and legumes, right? Yeah, and it's just completely, different. And that is actually the fun part, is exploring, the ways to cook foods differently. But on that note, though, like in terms of, going back to menopause, and requirement side of things, there are the macro and micronutrients that we need to be aware of that we'll kind of start touching on. So you're okay for me to elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, go on. I'd love to know a little bit more about this. Yeah.
With the, protein, the protein needs are higher, but again, context. So, and then that also needs to complement exercise or weight training, or at least resistance training. And then with carbohydrates, we need whole foods. And I tell my clients, this is an analogy that I use as well. So we don't want to chuck in a piece of paper into a fire and it'll burn and doesn't last long. So we need to chuck in logs of wood and kindling wood to keep that fire burning longer and more consistently. So this is, your whole grains foods, legumes, etc. And that has a big impact on our blood sugars too. And so with that decline in estrogen, that can affect how well we manage our blood sugars. So we need a lot more wood in our, diet as such. Yeah, and then with fats, we haven't really had a chance to, touch too much on that, but that is important for our mental health and our cognition, as well as our bone health, our heart health, and reducing cholesterol and inflammation. So with the Mediterranean diet I've been touching on, we hear about extra virgin olive oil and also the recommendation of 2 servings of oily fish a week for our omega-3s. But also don't forget other Mother Nature's foods, like with our plant packages, your linseeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, soybeans, tofu as an example, where they provide really good building blocks for our omega-3s. So that's kind of, the macro side of things. And then, are you ready for a little bit more stats?
Yeah, go on.
And in terms of, our micronutrients, our vitamins and minerals. Now, this is some more scary stats that, come to mind, is that if we look at our iron and calcium, because those 2 things are really important, as a population, we aren't meeting our requirements. So in the 2008-2009 New Zealand Adult Nutrition Survey, they found that almost 60% of adults weren't meeting their calcium requirements. And that's a long-standing trend for women that also aren't meeting their recommendation for daily intake for iron either. Now, here's something even a bit more scary, because if we reverse all the way back, because we're talking about puberty in reverse, hey? So when there was a more recent study in 2020, and they looked at adolescent women aged 15 to 18 years, and they found that 89% of them had inadequate calcium intake. And so it's a scary trend when we're looking at the building blocks and the stages of developing their peak bone mass, and then with menopause and preserving, what they've got. So it's a very kind of long answer to, is there a specific menopause diet? But in context, again, that starting point, if we were meeting our basic dietary guidelines and getting our macro and micronutrients sorted and our sources of fibre, we have already built a very solid foundation. And then from there, we can boost it further. But it has to start from the basics and not just jumping into something that we may not be ready for, or that we can't sustain for various reasons, or may not be mentally healthy for us. So that goes back to my motto, progression, not perfection.
Yeah, Christine, that makes so much sense. So it's those basic dietary requirements, which kind of brings me on to my next question. Because you've talked about the lack of calcium and the lack of iron. Is there a place for supplements, or should it just all be through diet? Because is there anything that women should be taking when they're managing menopause and arthritis? Or should they just be really cautious about this? Because I know it's a difficult area.
Yeah, it is definitely a difficult area and quite a lot to tease out as well. And sorry, I'm probably ranting quite a lot, but hopefully it's useful.
I think it's all very useful, believe you me.
Oh.
I personally am loving it, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I need to make some dietary changes.
Little bits here and there progression. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of supplements, it is a big can of worms. But again, context. So it is a great question. And if I had to kind of, say three things first, is that one, food first, and two
Yeah.
is avoid a pill for every ill, and then
Yeah.
third or three is too much of a good thing can become bad. And so this is what I kind of want to, tease out, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Is that when it comes to, with food first and getting those foundations right, it's not about having some, fancy pants, Instagram worthy meals, but actually just getting enough of those building blocks to build that solid foundation. So if we look at, like, for example, with Japanese women, for example, they often report fewer and less severe menopausal symptoms.
Yeah.
And in part, the traditional Japanese diet does play a role. And so from their diet rich in soy, which can be helpful for menopause, as well as other dietary components like your fermented foods, oily fish, green tea in moderation, and also the overall diet is high in fibre and low in animal fats. And so when we have that foundation, then from there we can begin to work and explore, the role of supplements. So if there is a deficiency, so I mentioned iron before, so if there is a deficiency like iron, they're 100% yes for supplements, because we need to build up those levels faster than we can from food. With others, there can be a form of support like magnesium glycinate. I sometimes recommend that women have found useful for more restful and deeper sleep. So again, for context, so important. And one is the other one is omega-3s. So we know that omega is important for inflammation. But remember what I talked about, where the role of fibre and being peacekeepers and gatekeepers. So it's not to say omega-3 supplements aren't of value, but food first, build from there, because we can't see it as a pill for every ill, because there's so many different factors and supporting mechanisms at play. Also, having talked about gut health, I can't not mention probiotics when it comes to supplements. So the key thing to remember, this is another analogy that is coming up, is that this is how my brain works. It's always been kind of visual. So the key thing to remember is that we have a very delicate ecosystem inside the gut. And as I mentioned before, we have over 1,000 species of bacteria. And so even though, when it comes to probiotics, even though there's a certain strain that may be for a certain symptom, let's say, it may not necessarily be what we need. And so when we buy a probiotic, which contains a very high number of a certain species or a couple of species, it could potentially change the ecosystem. And so if you imagine a garden and you only plant one type of flower, it might crowd out the other native plants that can actually lead to a less diverse and potentially less resilient ecosystem. So again, there is a role, but to tread with caution. And then the last bit is that third one is where too many things can become a burden. And so one is the number of supplements, and so they can interact and compete with each other, and the other is dosage. And so, for example, there's a lot of awareness at the moment around B6 in supplements. Not sure if
absolutely.
So that's now like fortified foods, like energy drinks, weight loss shakes, etc. And then we think, oh, it's a B vitamin, so it must be water soluble, which means our body will just flush out what it doesn't need. But not quite the case for B6. And so
Yeah.
B6 toxicity can lead to neurological symptoms like muscle weakness and even cognitive changes. So as a supplement or natural, can be pretty
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, watch out for B6. There's been some coverage of that in the media, hasn't there, Christine? Yeah, some kind of scary stories around that. So it's certainly one, possibly for people to watch out for. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And because what we get from food, because we do need the B6 vitamin, but what we get from food versus the dosage in a supplement, even if we think, oh, it's energy drink, a weight loss shake, etc., it's a lot higher than what our bodies actually get from food.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. So, food first, and then look at your supplements and what you might need. And certainly, I know I've tried magnesium for sleep, and I slightly wonder if it's more of the placebo effect.
The placebo effect is strong.
Yeah, exactly. But so it's just being approach it with caution. And remember, food first, fibre, and then a bit of protein, and just So moving on from that, it's I know women also really struggle with their weight during perimenopause, and quite often women gain weight around their middles, and so you hear a lot of women complaining about it. And so is there anything in particular women can do in terms of nutrition to manage this? And obviously taking into account that they've got arthritis as well. And it's maybe some ideas around that.
Yeah, lots of big questions, Jay. Lots to tease out.
Yes, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And so, yes, weight can play a role in both menopausal symptoms as well as arthritis. But we need to make sure we don't view health from a weight-centric approach. So there's something that I say where if it was truly about health, people would be posting lab results, not before and after photos. And because someone's size is not a true reflection of someone's health. And our bodies do change with age and with life stage. And we need to have a lot more compassion and kindness towards ourselves. And that decrease in estrogen does lead to a change in where we store fat, the changes in muscle mass, insulin sensitivity, our metabolism, all of that has an impact on weight gain. But weight gain is, typical dietitian, is not just as simple as calories in, calories out. And so if we there's an obesity geneticist called Professor Giles Yeo, and he has about over 20 years of experience in this field. And he said that there are, with individuals' energy balance, there are 3 areas. So there's genetics, environment, and brain signals. And so he estimates that about 40 to 70% of variation in body weight is due to our genes. And so, when we look at weight and menopause, genetics might affect how sensitive we may be to these hormonal changes. And then with our brain signals, with symptoms like poor sleep and hot flushes, they can add stresses to our system, which can affect food choices, therefore our weight, and then our food environment with what is around us and what's convenient. But one thing I do want to mention when it comes to weight and menopause is that going back to compassion side of things, it's important to know that perimenopause is considered a window of risk for the development or recurrence of eating disorders. And
I didn't know that, Christine. That's really interesting, but that does make sense. Yeah,
because we're seeing all these changes in our body, puberty changes in body, and this is another change. And so body dissatisfaction is a primary driver of eating disorders. And so when we look at the stats, while about 3.5% of women over 40 are diagnosed with a full eating disorder, so 3.5%, nearly 30% struggle with some form of disordered eating behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in terms of what can we do to manage our healthy weight, we need to look at it from several different angles. So eating well, which we've talked about, eating regularly, adequate protein, plenty of fibre from our whole foods, alongside our vitamins and minerals. But if we aren't getting enough sleep, we're chronically stressed, we're in a sandwich generation, which is looking after our young ones. My youngest one is, she's the wild child, and and our aging parents, and we aren't getting enough exercise or the right type of exercise to suit our individual needs, then we aren't truly supporting our overall health, and then weight gain can accelerate. And so if we become weight centric in our focus, then in the numbers on the scales, then we might show a difference in our before and after photos. But our gut ecosystem and our cardiovascular system and our brain may not necessarily be happy with us. Or if we go boot camp style and then, but we can't sustain it, the weight comes back once more. So we need to make changes for the long term. Nutrition and physical activity go hand in hand, hence my physio degree, nutrition degree. And we need to do what feels right for our bodies, mentally, physically, and at each point in time, because like with arthritis, there might be times where we can do more, focus more, and other times where it's just maintaining that steady state. But it's to move forward one step at a time.
That's awesome, Christine. I think great advice, because I think so often we do, as women, we all have this body image that we want to be more often than not what we're not. So so
and
I
more
think
exposure to social media.
Absolutely, which does not help. So I think I think that's awesome advice. Be more compassionate. Stop and look at your lifestyle rather than your size and where you've got extra weight as well.
Awesome. We are our harshest critic, and
we are.
We and there's
definitely
also
are.
That guilt, that blame, willpower, all those things. But there's a lot of layers to peel back.
No, thank you, Christine. That's fantastic. And so now just looking a little bit beyond menopause and looking at post-menopause, because obviously it's, a lot of our arthritis community have moved through that perimenopause transition and are now post-menopause. And is there anything different they should be doing at that life stage, nutritionally, looking beyond?
Great question. And so if we look at macro and micro again, is that with protein, we do need to continue having high protein from the menopause transition and beyond. With iron, levels do decrease with no longer losing iron through menstruation. So that drops from the recommendation of 18 milligrams a day to 8 milligrams a day. But there are some other nutrients that increase from age 50 beyond, in part also because our gut isn't as effective as it was before at absorbing it. And so this includes calcium and vitamin B12, and also vitamin D also increases, which is closely linked to the calcium for bone health. And we may also have other minerals that may be higher, with magnesium and potassium and zinc side of things. But again, if we look back at the the stats that we in terms of meeting requirements, we can see that as a population we are far from meeting our recommendation for fruits, vegetables, and even
we're useless.
It's quite it's quite confronting. Hey, even as a dietitian, it is very confronting. And then with our nuts and seeds, even only about a quarter of adults are eating nuts and seeds 3 or more times a week. And then with legumes, only about half of adults are eating the legumes of at least once a week. But that doesn't even mean that, they're eating the recommendation of several times a week. So, and it isn't just about, our meat and seafood that provides those great sources of magnesium, potassium, zinc. It's also our plant powerhouses. And so in perimenopause, this is a chance for change and recalibration. And then in post-menopause, nutritional needs do ramp up. And for arthritis, there's also more anti-inflammatory nutrients like your omega-3 antioxidants, calcium, and then all those vitamins become all the more important. But that baseline and then ramp up. But there is that.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's great, Christine. This is just so good. I'm now going to start walking around, I think, with this little bag of nuts and seeds on me at all times, just so I'm, making sure I've got that going at the bare minimum.
And on that note, actually, also, with snacks, it's like, it's bad to snack 3 meals a day. But actually, the snacks, are a great opportunity to boost those nutrients that we need, like those nuts as well. So, and our calcium.
Yeah. Oh no, fantastic. So to wrap up, there's so much, you've given us so much amazing information, Christine. And so I don't know if it's easy for you to just to wrap up and give us sort of, I guess, your top 3 nutrition tips for women going through menopause and arthritis, and what they might be, just sort of 3 key takeaways, because I think if we can condense it down a little bit from all this amazing information you've given us, it would be fantastic.
Thank you. I guess, my clients and my peers probably know me that condensing probably is very hard in my dictionary. I talk a lot when I talk. I guess the first tip would be, has to be a motto of mine, which is nourishment, not punishment. And focus on the foods that we can have to nourish the body, not the foods that you think you can't or shouldn't have. And this goes back to, all the things we've talked about, hey? And so it's because the more we can't have something, the more we want it. And but the more we, nourish ourselves with whole foods, we can have all these positive cascades on our health, and what we talked about today. So mindset has to be, number one, and that kindness and compassion towards ourselves, because we only have one body.
Nice.
And that unnecessary, stress just adds to that inflammation that we're trying so hard, to dampen. I've got a fun fact with this, this top tip, if that's okay. Is I'd like to share is that and so we talked about the Japanese diet, briefly, and but the word for menopause in Japanese, do you know what that is?
I do know what that is, but I'm going to let you say it, Christine.
So the Japanese word is konenki. And so, but with menopause in English, it comes from the Greek roots of the word, month and to stop. So menopause. But in Japanese, it's broken down into 3 elements. So ko means renewal and change and regeneration. Nen, which means year or years, and ki means season or stage or period. So konenki is the renewal years or a period of regeneration or the change of life. And so we use this menopausal transition and menopause to recalibrate and reset mentally and physically for the next stage in our life. So mindset has to be number one top tip.
Which is lovely, and it's that positive mindset, I think, isn't it? Which is so important. And I think that certainly as if we can just change our way of thinking, we can look at things quite differently and use it to empower how we move forward.
100%, because with all these symptoms, it can feel like monsoon or cyclone season, with all these things. But
no, that's fantastic. And anything else to add to that, Christine?
That's my first one.
I know. I was thinking we've still got 2 more to go.
So the second tip is actually your takeaway, which is go nuts with nuts. So that's what I'll say.
Good.
Because nuts and seeds are absolute powerhouses with protein, quality fats, fibre. So you're getting plenty of bang for your buck to support your bones, muscles, mood, gut health for menopause and arthritis. So breakfast, I always tell my clients, breakfast is a great way to get that variety with your nutty, seedy granola and different types of grains. And then when you add on Greek yogurt, you're getting more protein and not Greek style yogurt. Greek proper Greek yogurt, is that I tell my clients, be wary of marketing, food labels.
Oh, so, don't. I'm sucked into that. I'm terrible, Christine.
No, it is, there is, the Greek style yogurt, which is very different. But more protein, plenty of calcium and other minerals when you add that to the granola. Or if you're on the run, just, a seeded nut butter. There's 2 brands that I can't mention, but there's 2 brands in the supermarket that I absolutely love. And just put on toast. Off you go. You've got all different seeds and nuts in there. And also seeds are a great way to add to salads because, we said, it should be easy. Just jazz it up here. And so like your sesame seeds, if you're doing an Asian style salad or Asian style slaw, pumpkin, sunflower seeds, what I do is just toast them on a pan, like just dry. And when it's fragrant, and you let it cool down, store it in an airtight container and put it in the freezer. And then every time you need it, you just sprinkle it onto your slaws or salads. And trust me, it's like adding what I call 5% magic to your dish in terms of flavor and texture. But your body will also thank you for it as well. So
that's awesome. And that's easy. That's something easy we can all do. So yes, perfect.
And I do feel like with my boy as well, he loves eating the toasted. If it's not toasted, doesn't eat it. But so it's just getting out of the freezer because it doesn't stick together, and then he just punch away on it. So,
great for them as well. And what's your final tip?
Final one. So hopefully this is just to kind of wrap it up and also kind of put it into context. I guess my third one would be to keep it simple, and this is so important. And as we're spending well over a decade working with chronic long-term conditions as well, is that when it comes to arthritis, where mobility and dexterity may be an issue, don't be afraid of convenience foods. Having talked about, food branding, marketing, etc. But don't be afraid of convenience foods, especially if it's going to help you eat better and is easy to put together. So to give you an example, so like microwave rice cups, where it's just like the plain rice, and there's different varieties. You can get the brown ones and the quinoa, etc. So microwave rice cups with pre-packaged slaw, just the slaw itself, some deli roast chicken or some canned tuna, some defrosted edamame beans, a drizzle of Japanese mayo, and that 5% magic that I talked about, like some sesame seeds. And you've got a really great meal. It's kind of like a poke bowl. And
so, that's what I'm having for dinner tonight.
And so it needs to be, realistic in what works for you. And, and that's why that individual and that context side of things is so important. How do I apply it to me and with where I'm at? And also like frozen veggies, another convenience food. I love my veggie, stir fry mix because I use it a lot for like basic Asian clear soups, or a quick lunch with some couscous and tuna, and of course some toasted seeds like sunflower seeds, etc. And then when it comes to recipes, because we all love recipes, is that use it for inspiration, but create a meal based on components and eat in season. So what I mean is like your carbs, your protein, your veggies, mix and match and see where you can jazz it up with your nuts, seeds, legumes, because at the end of the day, eating doesn't need to be complicated. It has to be versatile. Food waste is a huge thing for me. So food waste is important, like not wasting food. And also importantly, we need to enjoy what we eat, just a little side tip is that like a not tip, just a little funny memory is that because as I mentioned in the beginning, my mum and dad are restaurateurs. And so I grew up surrounded by food, from since I was a baby. And my dad always likes to remind me that I was sitting in my high chair, swinging my feet away, enjoying seafood, and then when there's like celebrations, because we have like weddings and yum chas, everything, at the restaurant. This is in Malaysia. It's just I grew up around food and I love food. And so food has to be, enjoyed, and it keeps simple. I'm a bit of a mystery box girl when it comes to preparing meals. Like that's just my style and it works for me, purely because I know how to kind of mix and match. That's the way we should, do it, keep it simple. And also, but on that note, I will pop some, websites and that links that will be useful and that will include some recipes.
Awesome.
Again, just to use it for inspiration and then start creating your own magic.
Awesome. So I love that. finishing off, let's just keep it simple. Don't stress the big stuff. Yeah, focus on the small things, and that will really help. Yeah, through this, this life stage, really, menopause, when you're also dealing with arthritis as well. So, Christine, thank you so much. This has been so helpful, and I know our arthritis community will absolutely love it. So, thank you. And thanks so much for joining us today to talk about this incredibly important topic, because food, nutrition it's so important for our health and well-being.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Christine. And yes, and don't forget to look out for further podcasts because we'll delve deeper into menopause and arthritis moving forwards.